Welcome back to Marginal Thoughts. We're here again to unpack some interesting, sometimes tricky topics and hopefully make them a bit clearer. Today we're looking at a word that, well, makes economists pretty nervous, but honestly, for most of us, it probably sounds pretty good. We're talking about falling prices. I mean, imagine being able to buy more with your money tomorrow than you can today. That sounds like a dream, doesn't it?
It certainly has that immediate appeal, yes.
Mm.
But the reality, as we'll get into, is actually a lot more complex than that. What looks like a simple benefit can actually cause some, well, significant problems for the wider economy.
Right, exactly. So the simple idea hides some deeper stuff. If you've ever wondered, why governments don't just try and make everything cheaper or what really happens when prices do go down across the board, then stick around. We've looked through a whole stack of perspectives on this to bring you the key ideas about this often misunderstood economic concept. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's break this down. We hear loads about inflation prices going up, but what about the opposite? What is deflation exactly?
Well, simply put, deflation is just a decrease in the general price level for goods and services. It's what happens when the inflation rate actually falls below 0%. And what's really interesting there is when prices fall, the value, the purchasing power of your money, it goes up. So
Mm.
suddenly you can buy more things with the same amount of cash.
Huh. So if my burger usually costs, say, $3 with deflation, maybe I could get the burger and a drink for that same $3. My money is literally more powerful. That sounds fantastic for my wallet.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Your money's purchasing power increases. Now, it's also really important we distinguish deflation from disinflation.
Okay, disinflation, what's that?
Disinflation just means prices are still rising, but they're rising at a slower rate.
Eh.
So imagine inflation dropping from, say, 5% down to 2%. Prices are still going up, just not as fast.
Right.
Deflation, though, means prices are actively falling, like having an inflation rate of -1%.
Okay, got it. Falling, not just slowing down. So how do we actually know when this is happening? Like, how is it measured?
Well, statisticians, they track changes in prices over time, usually over 12 months. In the UK, for example, the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, they use something called the Consumer Prices Index, or CPI. It's basically a basket of common goods and services. And if that index, that CPI, is lower than it was the year before, that signals a period of general price decline. That's deflation.
Now, here's where I found it gets really interesting. Some viewpoints suggest that this isn't some weird modern thing, but that deflation was actually historically maybe more common.
That's a really key insight, and yeah, it feels counterintuitive today. Historically, when money was directly backed by something finite like gold or silver, well, technology improved, production got more efficient. And as goods became cheaper to make, their prices naturally tended to fall over time.
Oh, okay.
And this actually encouraged saving,
Yeah?
because people knew their money would likely buy more in the future, not less. Today, with our much more expansive money supply, not tied to gold, we've largely shifted away from that historical pattern. Our whole perspective on deflation is different now.
Right. It's still tempting, though, this idea of money being worth more. So if it has this appeal, why isn't it happening all the time? What
Right.
actually kicks off deflation?
Yeah, that's the critical question, isn't it? There are several things that can trigger this shift. One major one is a drop in the overall money supply circulating in the economy.
How does that happen? Does the central bank just, like, turn off the printing presses?
It's a bit more involved than that. Central banks like the Bank of England or the Fed in the U.S., they use tools, what they call monetary policy, to manage money and credit. So, for example, they might use tighter monetary policy. They could increase interest rates.
Okay.
When interest rates go up, saving money looks more attractive than spending it. And borrowing money, that gets more expensive for businesses. So this naturally discourages spending and investment, meaning less money is flowing around. We definitely saw elements of this after the 2008 financial crisis. Banks got very cautious about lending, people couldn't access funds as easily, and spending just dropped off. Another big factor, often linked to that, is a loss of confidence in the economy.
Ah, yeah.
If people get worried about the future, maybe a recession seems likely, or they fear losing their jobs, they tend to cut back on spending. They start hoarding cash just in case.
That makes total sense. If I'm worried about my job, I'm definitely not buying that new TV or car, right? I'll wait.
Exactly, you hold back.
Yeah.
What else? Well, an increase in the total supply of goods and services can also push prices down. This can happen for a couple of main reasons. First, lower production costs. If it suddenly becomes cheaper for businesses to make things, maybe raw materials get cheaper or energy costs fall, they can produce more. But if demand from consumers doesn't rise to meet that extra supply, businesses might have to cut prices just to sell everything.
Okay, simple supply and demand.
Right. And second, technological advances. This is a huge one, historically and even now. New tech makes production faster, more efficient, and ultimately cheaper. Just think about data storage costs. In 1980, storing 1 gigabyte cost something like $437,500.
Yeah.
Insane, right?
Right.
By 2014, it was about 3 cents. That kind of massive productivity gain often gets passed on to us as consumers through lower prices. And then finally, a broad decline in aggregate demand. That's just the fancy term for a decrease in the total desire and ability to buy stuff across the whole economy. This can be because the government cuts its own spending, or maybe a stock market crash makes people feel poorer, or simply consumers deciding en masse to save more and spend less.
Okay, so lots of potential triggers. Which brings us to the big question. We've heard it sounds good for me if the consumer, my money goes further. But then we hear economists wringing their hands. So is deflation ultimately good or bad?
It's nuanced. Look, a tiny bit of deflation, especially if it comes from things getting cheaper to make because of technology that increase productivity, that can feel good. Your money does go further. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, a widespread, sustained period of deflation is seen as not a good thing for the economy overall. It's actually quite dangerous.
But why? I'm still stuck on the more purchasing power bit. That sounds like a definite win.
Okay.
What's the catch?
It feels like a win initially, yes. You can buy more stuff with the same amount of money. The problem is, if an economy gets stuck in a serious deflationary period, it can easily spiral downwards into something much worse.
Yeah.
We're talking recession, or even, in extreme cases, depression. There are a couple of really big negative consequences. First, increased unemployment. Think about it. If prices are falling, businesses are making less profit on everything they sell. To cut costs, what's often their biggest expense, staff.
Right, wages and salaries.
Exactly. So that often leads to layoffs or maybe hiring freezes or even wage cuts for those who keep their jobs. Fewer people working means less income being spent, which pushes demand down further. And second, and this one is absolutely critical to understand, an increase in the real value of debt.
The real value of debt. What does that mean?
Okay, imagine you borrowed, say, £100, maybe on a loan or mortgage. You still owe that £100 in nominal terms, right? The number doesn't change. But if the general price level has fallen significantly, say, by 10%, and maybe your wages have also fallen or stagnated, that £100 you owe effectively becomes more expensive in real terms.
Ah, because the money you're earning is worth less, you have less of it, but the debt amount stays the same.
Precisely. It takes more of your diminished purchasing power to pay it back. This really hurts individuals with mortgages, student loans, credit cards, and it's terrible for governments, too, if they have large national debts. The burden just grows heavier.
Wow, okay. That's a really stark contrast to the initial cheaper stuff idea. It completely flips the script. How did economists figure out it was so dangerous? Was there a specific moment?
The big turning point was really the Great Depression in the 1930s. That period saw severe, prolonged deflation. Prices just kept falling, and it happened alongside incredibly high unemployment and massive numbers of people defaulting on their debts. Economists like John Maynard Keynes and Irving Fisher, they developed theories trying to explain this. They showed how falling prices could feed into a cycle of pessimism, falling investment, job losses, and this crushing real debt burden, creating that downward spiral.
So the Great Depression was the harsh lesson.
It really was. And it's largely because of that experience that most central banks around the world today don't aim for zero inflation. They actually aim for a small, stable amount of inflation, usually around 2% or maybe 3%.
Why 2 or 3%?
Well, it's low enough that price rises aren't too painful. They don't erode your savings too quickly. But crucially, it's high enough to create a buffer zone. It keeps prices comfortably away from falling into that dangerous deflationary territory we've been talking about. It's about finding that economic sweet spot.
Okay, so it's about avoiding the edge of falling prices, which means, just to be clear, if I see my favorite sweater is on sale for 30% off, that's not a sign the economy is about to collapse, right?
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
Relax. Sales, discounts, those are just normal business tactics to shift inventory or attract customers. We're talking about something much broader, a general, widespread, and sustained decrease in prices across the entire economy, not just one shop or one product.
Right, the overall trend. Okay, so we've mentioned this deflationary spiral. It sounds pretty scary. Can you walk us through how that actually works? How does this vicious circle get going?
Yeah, vicious circle is a good way to put it. It's like like rolling a snowball downhill. It starts small but picks up speed and gets bigger and harder to stop. So if prices fall just a little bit, that's probably okay. You might think, great, that TV I wanted is cheaper, I'll buy it.
Mm.
But if prices start falling significantly, and crucially, if people expect them to keep falling, that's where the trouble starts. The first big domino to fall is often that people stop shopping.
But hang on, why would they stop if things are getting cheaper? Wouldn't they rush out to buy?
Because you start thinking, why buy today if it'll be even cheaper tomorrow? If that TV is 25% off now, maybe you think, maybe it'll be 50% off next month.
Ah, the expectation of further falls?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That expectation causes consumers to delay purchases. They decide to wait, maybe hold on to their cash, and what happens then? Well, goods start piling up in warehouses, unsold. And when businesses see their inventory swelling because things aren't selling, they react. They cut back on production. They tell their suppliers, stop sending us stuff. They tell manufacturers, stop making new things. And what does that lead to?
Layoffs.
Bingo. Mass layoffs. People in manufacturing and retail and transport, they lose their jobs. Suddenly you have a growing number of unemployed people. They aren't earning money, which means they have even less ability to buy things, even at lower prices.
So demand falls even more, which forces businesses to cut prices again to try and sell anything, which leads to more layoffs because profits are shrinking further. Wow, it really is a spiral.
It absolutely is. The pool of unemployed people grows. Their lack of spending power reduces overall demand even more, which puts more downward pressure on prices, leading to more business failures and job losses. It feeds on itself. The economy gets stuck in a really nasty downward loop. And there's another dangerous part to this. When people get scared and uncertain about the future, they tend to hoard cash.
Right. Stuff it under the mattress, metaphorically speaking.
Pretty much. They pull their money out of circulation, out of banks, because they don't trust the system, or they just want the security of physical cash. This means banks have less money deposited, which means they have less money available to lend out to businesses or homebuyers. The whole credit system can start to seize up. This lack of lending and investment makes the economic downturn even worse. This was a major feature of the Great Depression, banks failing, credit freezing.
Okay, that paints a pretty grim picture. So given how damaging this deflationary spiral can be, how do governments and central banks actually fight it? What weapons do they have in their arsenal?
Right, well, since the root problems are often too little money circulating and too little spending, the main strategies involve reversing that. They need to get more money into the economy and encourage people and businesses to start spending and investing again. Broadly, there are two main types of policy responses. You've got monetary policy, which is the job of the central bank, and fiscal policy, which is handled by the government.
Okay, let's start with the central bank. What can they do with monetary policy?
So the central bank has several key tools. First, and most obviously, they can lower interest rates. Cutting rates makes borrowing cheaper. Cheaper mortgages for you, cheaper loans for businesses wanting to expand. The goal is to incentivize borrowing and spending.
Make money less expensive to get hold of.
Exactly. Second, they can increase the money supply more directly through things like open market operations. This is where the central bank buys assets, usually government bonds, from commercial banks. When they buy these bonds, they pay the banks with newly created money, essentially injecting cash straight into the banking system.
Yeah.
With more reserves, banks are hopefully more willing and able to lend money out, often at lower rates themselves, further stimulating activity.
Okay, inject cash into the banks so they lend more. What if that's still not enough?
Well, if interest rates are already near zero and the economy is still stuck, they might turn to more unconventional tools like quantitative easing or QE.
Ah, yes, QE. We hear that term a lot.
Right. With QE, the central bank creates even more new money, digitally this time, and uses it to buy large quantities of government bonds and sometimes even other assets like corporate bonds, directly from the wider market, not just from banks. The scale is usually much bigger than standard open market operations. The idea is to flood the system with liquidity, push down longer-term interest rates, make borrowing really cheap, and basically signal very strongly that they are determined to get inflation back up and avoid that deflationary trap. It's a pretty powerful, though sometimes controversial tool.
So they're really trying hard to spark some inflation to counteract the deflation. Okay, what about the government's role? What's fiscal policy got to do with it?
So the government controls fiscal policy, which mainly involves two levers: taxes and government spending. One approach is to lower taxes. They could cut income tax, leaving you with more disposable income, hoping you'll spend it, or they could cut business taxes, hoping companies will invest more or hire more people. The theory is More money in people's and businesses' hands leads to more demand.
Makes sense. More money, more spending, hopefully.
The other main fiscal tool is increasing government spending. The government itself can start spending more money, directly injecting demand into the economy. Think about large infrastructure projects, building new roads, schools, hospitals, maybe green energy projects. These things require hiring lots of people, buying lots of materials, cement, steel, equipment.
Right. Big projects mean lots of economic activity.
Exactly. These massive projects can inject millions, even billions, directly into the economy. This increases the money supply, directly creates jobs, stimulates demand, and helps to counteract the falling prices and activity slump.
Okay, so a two-pronged attack. Central bank handling money supply and interest rates, government handling taxes and spending. Got it. Now, this has been super insightful explaining the mechanics and the dangers, but it also sounds, frankly, a bit scary. If, hypothetically, we were heading into a serious deflationary period, what can we do as individuals to, protect ourselves financially?
That's a really practical and important question. Because while severe deflation is thankfully rare in modern economies, being aware of the risks and having some strategies in mind is always sensible. So a few key things stand out. First, as we discussed, that issue of debt becomes critical. So reducing your debt is probably priority number one. Because the real burden of your mortgage, your student loan, your credit card balance, it all increases during deflation. Paying down those balances as much as possible or avoiding taking on new debt can provide a crucial safety cushion.
Get rid of liabilities that become heavier over time. Okay, what else?
Second, consider your investments. During deflationary times, which are often uncertain economic times, many investors shift towards safer assets. So investing in high-quality bonds might be a strategy. Things like government bonds or bonds from very financially stable corporations are generally seen as lower risk. They provide a fixed income stream, which can be valuable when other asset prices might be falling, and they tend to hold their value better than riskier things like stocks in such an environment.
So, shift towards safer income-generating assets. What about cash?
Yes, maintaining a healthy cash reserve is also generally advisable. Remember, during deflation, the purchasing power of your cash actually increases.
Right, money itself becomes more valuable.
Exactly. So having cash on hand gives you that increased purchasing power plus flexibility. It allows you to cover expenses if your income drops, and potentially even to buy assets like stocks or property at much lower prices if the market takes a big hit. And if you do stay invested in stocks, it probably makes sense to focus on companies that are financially very strong, those with lots of cash on their balance sheets and very little debt themselves. They're much better positioned to survive and maybe even thrive during a tough economic period like deflation.
Okay, so reduce debt, consider safer bonds, hold some cash, and if investing in stocks, focus on quality, debt-free companies. That's very helpful, practical advice. Well, that really was quite an exploration into the world of falling prices. It started off sounding, almost too good to be true for consumers, but it quickly revealed just how complex and potentially challenging deflation can be for the whole economy. Understanding both sides, inflation and deflation, definitely gives you a much clearer picture of the whole economic landscape and why stability, that balance, is so important.
Absolutely. The goal, as we said, usually isn't zero price change. It's that gentle rise, that kind of economic sweet spot. It keeps things moving without making money worthless too quickly. And that historical point that maybe deflation was more the norm when money was tied to something finite like gold, it really does make you think about how our current system, with its ability to expand the money supply, shapes our behavior and expectations today, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It makes you pause and really consider, what if your money was actually expected to be worth more tomorrow than today? How would that fundamentally change how we all spend, save, borrow, and invest? Definitely something to mull over. We really hope this discussion has given you some valuable insights, maybe answered some questions, or even sparked some new ones. If you found this helpful, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. And of course, please hit that like button if you enjoyed it. And be sure to subscribe to the Marginal Thoughts channel for more explorations into the ideas shaping our world. Until next time, keep thinking, keep learning.